Most people think inflation hurts everyone equally. Prices go up, money loses value, and everyone suffers. That's the story you've been told your whole life. But here's the uncomfortable truth no one explains clearly. Inflation didn't just happen to the rich, it quietly worked for them. And in many cases, it made them richer than ever. Let me ask you something before we go any further. If inflation is so bad, why do the wealthiest people on Earth seem to come out stronger after every inflationary period, while the middle class feels permanently exhausted and the poor fall further behind? This is not an accident, this is not luck, and it's definitely not because the rich are smarter than everyone else. There is one specific fact about inflation that changes everything once you understand it, and once you see it, you'll never look at rising prices the same way again. Most people experience inflation at the grocery store, the gas station, or when rent goes up. They feel inflation as pain, but the rich experience inflation somewhere else entirely. They experience it in debt, assets, and leverage. That difference alone explains the entire wealth gap you see today. Here's the fact most people don't understand. Inflation punishes savers, but it rewards owners, especially owners who use debt intelligently. Let's slow this down, because this is where everything changes. When inflation rises, the value of money goes down. That part is obvious. What's not obvious is what happens to debt during inflation. Debt becomes cheaper over time, not emotionally cheaper, but mathematically cheaper. Imagine someone borrows $1 million at a fixed interest rate. That debt is locked in. Inflation rises year after year. Prices go up. Salaries eventually rise. Assets rise. But the debt stays the same in nominal terms. In real terms, that debt is shrinking. Now here's the key detail. Who has access to large amounts of fixed-rate debt? Not the average worker, not the hourly employee, not the person living paycheck to paycheck. It's the asset owners, the investors, the corporations, the wealthy individuals with collateral. Inflation slowly erases the real value of what they owe while increasing the value of what they own. This is the mechanism that quietly transfers wealth upward. Let's talk about assets, because this is where the gap widens fast. During inflation, real assets tend to rise in price. Real estate, stocks, businesses, land, even certain commodities. When the cost of living goes up, the price of owning productive assets usually follows. If you own an apartment building, inflation allows you to raise rents over time. Your mortgage payment stays mostly fixed, but your rental income rises. That difference goes directly into your pocket. If you own a company, inflation allows you to raise prices. Consumers complain, but they still pay. Your revenue increases, while much of your old debt becomes easier to service. If you own stocks, inflation often pushes asset prices higher because companies report higher nominal earnings, even if real productivity hasn't changed much. Now compare that to the experience of someone who doesn't own assets. If you rely on wages, inflation hits first and raises your expenses immediately. Your salary might increase later, but usually slower than prices. Sometimes it doesn't increase at all. Meanwhile, your savings lose purchasing power. Every single day they sit in cash. This is the silent part of the collapse. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly enough that people blame themselves instead of the system. Here's the brutal reality. Inflation is not neutral. It's asymmetric. It favors those closest to the source of new money. When governments and central banks inject money into the economy, that money does not reach everyone at the same time. It enters through banks, financial markets, corporations, and asset holders first. By the time it reaches workers and consumers, prices have already adjusted upward. This is why asset prices often surge before wages do. The rich don't just survive inflation, they position themselves ahead of it. They borrow when money is cheap. They buy assets early, they let inflation do the rest of the work. And most people never notice because the process is wrapped in complexity and economic jargon. Let me make this painfully simple. If you own assets and owe fixed debt, inflation works for you. If you depend on wages and hold cash, inflation works against you. That's the fact. And here's where the story gets uncomfortable. The system rewards behavior that most people are never taught. Schools teach you to save money. They don't teach you what inflation does to savings. They teach you to avoid debt. They don't teach you how inflation destroys debt for those who know how to use it. So people do what they're told. They save, they avoid risk, they stay liquid, and over time, they wonder why they feel like they're running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. Meanwhile, those at the top play a completely different game. They understand that inflation is not just a problem, it's a tool. Now, this does not mean inflation is good for society. It creates inequality, it creates instability, it erodes trust, but understanding it is the difference between being crushed by it and learning how it actually works. This is exactly why channels like Silent Collapse exist. Not to scare you, but to explain the mechanisms most people never see until it's too late. Here's something most people miss. Inflation doesn't just make the rich richer by raising asset prices, it also reshapes behavior. When inflation is high, people rush to spend money quickly before it loses value. That benefits businesses and asset holders. When inflation is high, people avoid holding cash. That pushes money into markets, driving prices higher again. It becomes a feedback loop. Those who own assets get appreciation plus inflation protection. Those who don't are forced into constant consumption just to survive. Now ask yourself this question honestly. Who designed a system where money loses value over time, and who benefits the most from that design? It's not the person saving for retirement in cash. It's not the worker trying to keep up with rent. It's not the family watching grocery bills double. It's the borrower with leverage. It's the asset holder. It's the institutions closest to money creation. And here's the part most people never hear. Inflation is rarely described as a tax, but that's exactly what it is. A hidden tax on purchasing power. And like most hidden taxes, it's regressive. It hurts those with the least ability to protect themselves. The wealthy hedge inflation automatically through ownership. Everyone else feels it manually through pain. Now let me say something important before this gets misunderstood. Understanding this does not make you immoral. It makes you aware. You don't fix a system by pretending it doesn't exist. You fix it by seeing it clearly. This is your moment to pause the video mentally and ask yourself one honest question. Am I positioned to benefit from how the system actually works, or am I positioned the way I was told to be? If you've watched this far, it means you're not here for entertainment. You're here to understand reality. And if that's the case, make sure you're subscribed to Silent Collapse, because this channel exists to explain what most media avoids and most institutions won't teach. Now let's go deeper, because this fact has consequences. When inflation makes the rich richer, it also changes politics, culture, and power. Asset owners gain more influence. Rent seekers gain leverage. The gap between those who own and those who rent widens. This is why housing becomes unaffordable. This is why younger generations feel locked out. This is why financial stress feels permanent, not temporary. It's not just prices going up, it's positioning. Inflation rewards past access. If you already owned assets before inflation hit, you're protected. If you didn't, inflation raises the entry price. That's why people say, I should have bought earlier. They're not wrong. Inflation makes late entry more expensive. And the system rarely offers a reset. This is why inflation is one of the most powerful wealth transfer mechanisms in history. Quiet, legal, gradual, and devastating if you don't understand it. So, here's the final truth I want you to sit with. Inflation did not accidentally make the rich richer, it systematically did. And unless people understand this mechanism, it will keep happening generation after generation. The goal isn't panic, the goal is awareness. Because once you understand how the game works, you stop blaming yourself for outcomes that were structurally designed. And that awareness is the first step out of the silent collapse. If this perspective changed how you see inflation, stay with this channel. Silent Collapse is where we break down the systems shaping your future, quietly, honestly, and without noise.